Hello there, and squirrel! Welcome to Magic by Design. We're setting off on an adventure to Paradise Falls this week to review Pixar's 10th animated feature, Up, first released in 2009. Note here, I got my numbers mixed up in the last couple of weeks and was one number ahead, so this is Pixar's 10th animated feature, I can confirm. But before we go up and away, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ken, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host / brother Garrett. Gar, how are you?
Isn't the universe weird?
Totally bonkers.
Because as we record this, last night we watched Up, and as we record this, literally 2 hours ago, it was announced that Ed Asner died.
And it's so strange, and this is one of the things that makes me feel like the world is a simulation, because that's such a weird coincidence.
If we never started this podcast, would Ed Asner still be alive?
Did we kill Ed Asner?
I think we might have.
Now granted, he was 91, so maybe Father Time killed Ed Asner, but...
Very, very strange, though. That's like, literally... And usually we record the podcast earlier in the afternoon as well, so it's even a weird thing that we're doing a little later in the evening. Because typically we would have recorded the podcast before the news came out that he had passed away. But because we're doing a little birthday celebration for our dad, it's later in the afternoon. Or into the evening, and then the news broke. What a weird set of coinkydinks.
Yeah. The thing is, as well, I specifically looked up Ed Asner to see if he was still alive, because I know they're doing an Up television show on Disney Plus centered around Doug, and I'm like, is it still Ed Asner doing the voice? And it was. And it's like, oh, Ed Asner's still around. Fair play to him, 91. Died the next day.
Very odd. So strange. And yeah, at least, like, I assume they've recorded all his lines for that TV show, so they will still have his voice on that TV show, but...
And if they do a second season, they'll just get someone that sounds exactly like him, because that's how Disney work.
Yeah, because I was watching Marvel's What If, where they have the vast majority of the people back, but not all of them. So it's like a fun game of like, obviously you know it's not Scarlett Johansson, right, based on her relationship with Disney, but like Robert Downey Jr. is not back, Chris Evans isn't back, so they have sound-alikes for some of those people. There's a character that's revealed at the end of the third episode that I guess is technically kind of a spoiler that I won't say, but also she's not voiced by the actress who plays her. It's fun to play that little game of like, who's a sound-alike and who's the actor?
Anyway, rest in peace to Ed Asner. We'll dedicate this podcast to him.
Yeah,
appropriately.
He is Up.
Yep.
Like, he's this movie. The heart and soul of it is his performance.
Well, a lot of the film is driven by him. I know Russell exists, but...
Like, Russell is only as interesting as he is related to Carl. Like, I don't think Russell by himself is a particularly interesting character, but they do some interesting stuff about, like, Russell's family life and him looking for a father figure. He's only really interesting when he's, like, relating that back to Carl and the son Carl could never have.
He's kind of a foil for Carl other than that, you know? He's impeding Carl, but also... Carl doesn't realise that he needs the help, you know.
But this is thoroughly, it's just the Ed Asner show. Like, from the old grumpy curmudgeon performance, which is great, to the slowly gaining the heart of gold performance, which is also great.
And just gaining his confidence back and, you know, becoming what is ostensibly an action hero in the end.
Yeah, learning to live again after, you know, the loss of his spouse. Like, this film is very famous for its first 10 minutes, where it unfurls the life story of Carl and Ellie, who go through their entire life living happily, can't have kids. They don't dive like into whether or not she miscarried or whether or not they just can't have kids for whatever biological reason.
Yeah,
but
they don't show her revealing that she's pregnant, but they do show them preparing to have a baby. So it could go either way.
Yeah, but the way they communicate that is they show you her crying in a doctor's office to communicate to you that they, for whatever reason, cannot have children or tried and failed to have children. Either way, very depressing thing to put in this children's movie. It's like these characters went through serious things and they over their lifetime tried to save toward their dream of going to Paradise Falls, and over and over again, you know, burst tire or whatever. Carl would end up in the hospital and they'd have to break their jar to chip into their funds to pay for something. And then the moment he's like, you know what, screw it, we're going to Paradise Falls. He goes, buys the ticket. They go up the hill where, you know, they saw that Carl struggled to climb the hill, but Ellie earlier in the movie could climb the hill with gusto. But then you see Ellie is struggling to climb the hill, Ken, and then she falls down, and then you learn that she's died. And this is the first 10 minutes of the movie. Like, if they released that first 10 minutes as just a short, it would be an absolute bloody masterpiece.
The thing is, people remember the part with the music, but the preamble to that, where they meet as children, where you basically see that they form this bond, this lifelong bond. I'm going to cry, Gar. It's just like they come into each other's lives at the right time. They need each other. They complement each other. One's kind of shy and reserved. The other's outgoing. Oh my God, I'm getting teary even thinking about it.
It's just a perfect piece of filmmaking. I've taken very few notes in this movie.
Yeah, me too. It's because I didn't want to overshadow this podcast talking too much about the facts. We'll go into some of it. But the story and the themes and the characters really drive this one.
Like, I think it was Tarzan we identified as just like Disney firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
It's like all the things that Disney does well, they're doing well. And they're not necessarily doing anything new, but everything they're doing is just laser refined perfection for the Disney formula. And I feel very similar about Up. Like, there's very little in Up that really pushes the boundaries of what Pixar are doing, even relative to WALL-E, which is, I think, a film that did really push the boundaries of what Pixar is doing.
Yeah.
But it's just everything Pixar does well, from the music, to the story, to the visuals, to the characters, to the off-the-wall ideas, to filling out this world and thinking about, well, what would a house flown by balloons actually, how would that work? How would that operate? All of that is just Pixar. Perfectly refined, perfectly pared down to everything they need in this movie. It's not bloated. Movie's an hour and a half. Perfect length. It is just... It's not Pixar's best film, but it's probably their most refined.
It's very interesting, though, because there's a lot of fantastical elements, like the mythical bird.
Dogs.
There's the...
Many talking dogs.
Many talking dogs. There's the flying house. There's the fact that they basically carry the house like a balloon, which is an allegory for Carl and Ellie's life.
Literally carrying the weight of his dead wife on his back until he can finally let it go.
Exactly. But at the core of it is Carl and his struggling with grief and coming to terms with it and missing Ellie and, realizing that there's life beyond that and maybe he needs to help Russell because Russell is crying out for help this entire movie.
Or Ken. Does Russell need to help him?
Yeah, so they help each other. In a lot of ways, it's like when Carl and Ellie met, they needed each other. And when Russell and Carl met, they needed each other. But it's interesting that a film that's so fantastical is grounded by these really, I don't want to say grim, but really adult themes.
Reminds me a lot of Lilo and Stitch. Again, a film about aliens and all that, but really at its core, it's about kid dealing with the loss of her parents. Whereas this film is about, talking dogs and zeppelins and mythical creatures in the jungle. At its core, it's about a dude dealing with the loss of his wife. It's just, it's such a perfect movie in every single way. I can't imagine, good cute animal sidekicks, thumbs up. They do all the children's film things that they kind of have to put in these movies, but they do them all well and in an entertaining way. It is the perfect Pixar movie, even if it's not the best Pixar movie.
Director Pete Docter began developing the concept for Up as far back as 2004 under the title Heliums, based on Docter's own fantasies of escaping life when things become too overwhelming or annoying. Up was released in May 2009 and opened at the Cannes Film Festival, becoming the first animated and 3D film to do so. The film grossed $735 million off a budget of $175 million, becoming the sixth highest grossing film of 2009. It'll be no surprise to anyone that Up received widespread acclaim from critics and audiences alike, with many hailing it as one of the best animated films of all time. The characters, the themes, the narrative, Asner's vocal performance and Giacchino's score were praised, as was the montage of Carl and Ellie's life together growing old.
Because that is the thing, when you mention Up, literally, the first thing everyone remembers is the first 10 minutes, because it does hit you like a sack of bricks.
Yeah. The music is enough to get me going, but watching it there, I did get teary again. I've seen it several times.
You see people fall in love, have dreams, have their dreams shattered, find new dreams, live their life together, and one of them dies. And then the film is about what happens after one of them dies. But they go through you see the whole roller coaster of their life. It's not just, they lived a perfect, happy life, and now one of them is dead. That's probably the easier, it's a kid's film. We can't show them not being able to have kids. That's just too much of a gut punch for this children's movie. Whereas Pixar are like, nah.
Let's do it. Let's give kids some credit.
And that's the important part. It's important that they couldn't have kids because that's what Carl is doing essentially in this movie, finally having a child.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that, Gar.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? I've never thought about that, but you're right.
Yeah, because they couldn't have kids, and then he has suddenly a kid foisted upon him, and that's how he finds meaning in the world after his wife dies.
And the lack of a child and the lack of fulfilling their dream of Paradise Falls, that deepens Carl's grief in the start of the film. He feels like he doesn't know how to go on without her, because we see Carl as a child who's shy, retiring, has the dreams, same dreams as Ellie, but Ellie is much more outgoing and vocal about it. And, you know, he just doesn't know how to live without her. We just see him learning to do that throughout the film while adopting a child, essentially.
And they do some really fun things with like the color palette at the start of the movie. You know, you see that entire montage is full of color. It's bright and happy. And then immediately when we get to the current day, we see like they suck a lot of the life out of the colors. When he's in that house by himself on his own, there's a lot of grays. Well, it's not quite grays, but it's just
brown.
It's just muted. All of the color in his world is muted because Ellie is gone.
Yeah, some really nice choices, Gar, and you actually move us nicely onto the animation there. Doctor and 11 other Pixar artists spent 3 days in Venezuela gathering research and inspiration. Here,
of course they did.
Yeah.
Oh, did they go there via balloon? If they did, I'll allow it. But if they didn't, I'm furious.
No, they just took a plane like suckers.
Absolute cowards. If they're not like, we're going to work out how the mechanics of this balloon work properly in order to animate them, then we're not allowed to go on this trip.
The characters here are heavily caricatured and stylized. We've seen this in Pixar films since Toy Story, but all the proportions are either squashed or elongated. Carl's basically a square, and he looks strikingly like Ed Asner.
Well, he's more of like a cube version of Ed Asner.
Yeah. The challenge on Up was making these stylized characters feel natural. Doctor remarked, the effects came across better than animating the realistic characters from Toy Story, who suffered from an uncanny valley effect. We commented on that at the time.
Yeah, like they don't go for realistic characters. None of the characters in this movie look realistic. They're all caricatures. Which is fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. I don't need these. And like when we get to Soul, we'll be like, whoa, how do they do such realistic looking characters? And then we're like, all right. But until then. But even then, Soul is kind of caricatures as well.
Yeah. They are much more lifelike in terms of skin tones, in terms of body shapes, things like that. But in this case, I understand what they're doing because it does deepen the appeal. If we try to make Carl and Russell realistic, I think we wouldn't have connected with this movie as much.
And yeah, like, I don't know, it's a thing we're just not good at, even now, still. It's a thing we don't really talk about with video games, where, like, people are like, whoa, these video games look really realistic. But if you really look at, like, the human models in video games, they look just kind of weird and derpy still.
Yeah, and we just can't get it right. And it's weird how we identify more with these characters than humans. Isn't that strange?
Yeah, and you can do more fantastical and interesting things with these weird-looking square characters as opposed to actual people.
Another interesting note here, Gar, to animate old people, Pixar animators would study their own parents or grandparents and also watched footage of the Senior Olympics, which I did not know was a thing, but I now need to look up.
All right, Mom, sit down. I need to look at your face for a good 2 hours in order to know where the wrinkles go.
The directors had various rules for Carl's movements. He could not turn his head more than 15 or 20 degrees without turning his torso as well, nor could he raise his arms very high. However, they wanted him to grow more flexible near the end of the film, transforming into an action hero, because he does go full Arnie in the end.
Yeah, it's interesting if you actually watch how they animate him, because at the very end of the movie there's a scene where he's literally chasing his floating away house across the top of a blimp in the middle of the air. And you can see they still have him run in a way that's like, he's still an old man.
Yeah.
And like, even though they have him doing all that action hero stuff, he still kind of runs like an old man.
Yeah.
Even when he's chasing that house off the side of a blimp, he's not like sprinting to catch it. He's still kind of like doing the old man waddle because he needs to walk with a cane otherwise.
Yeah, to your point, the adrenaline is flowing, so we can go with it, but they don't want to do it too much because other films would have completely thrown the realism or his age out the window to get from point A to point B in terms of the finale.
And they do a little, to be fair.
They do a little, but it's enough that you can suspend your disbelief because they do still show that he feels the effects of what he's doing, but he's just propelled by his motivation to help Kevin and Russell.
And they do at least do a little bit where he's having a sword fight with Charles Muntz.
Yeah.
And they both put their arms in the air and their backs go out and they're stuck for a second.
So it's like your classic, Hobbs and Shaw style fight, except with pensioners who can't really fight. It's a war of attrition to see who can last the longest.
You did raise the point. What age is Charles Muntz?
That's the thing, because when we start the film, we see Carl in the cinema watching Charles Muntz on a film reel. He's a full-on adult. Carl's a child.
You would assume there's at the very least, 20, 25 years between them at that stage.
Possibly even 30.
Yeah, so we see Carl in his pensioner days, so Carl is probably 70 minimum.
So months must be over 100?
Yeah, living down in this jungle. Maybe he's discovered the secret of life down in this jungle.
Possibly. That's the one thing I think they didn't think about too much.
And like, it's a Pixar film, so who really cares? But yeah, and they do like suggest that this man is ancient when they find him.
Yeah, and maybe he's kept alive by spite by trying to catch Kevin.
And there's a weird like Gollum effect to him where he has like aged so much that he's almost non-human looking to an extent.
Yeah, because he's driven by rage, basically. Or not even rage, but spite.
It's mostly spite.
And anger or resentment.
He's just like, you have said that I did not find this bird. I'm going to goddamn find this bird. And I'm not coming back until I find this bird.
One of the technical directors calculated that to make Carl's house fly, it would require 23 million balloons. But Doctor realised that such a high number made the balloons look like small dots. Instead, the balloons were created to be twice the size of Carl. So in the end, there are 10,297 balloons for shots of the house just flying and 20,622 balloons during the liftoff sequence. A varying number in other scenes because, as we know, they lose ones along the way.
Yeah, and like if they were to try and animate that many balloons, it would like, all right, the poor Pixar people would be there for like 15 years.
I know they have software that they often develop to automate some of this stuff because the balloons, they're not just like floating, or they show the effects, like as Carl says during the movie that we have about 3 days until these balloons lose their helium, and you see during the film that some of them are they're waning, but even just they react to their conditions. They don't just stay up, they bobble and react to wind and all these different things.
Because how many did you say it would take them to float the house? Was it 20 million?
20 million, yeah. 23 million.
So can you imagine actually having 23 million balloons on the screen?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that would like be impossible to animate without the house being like 15 times bigger.
Exactly. So it's scaled down for the movie, but it makes sense. I had one more note on the animation, Gar. Up does a much better job of visualizing a jungle than The Incredibles did.
Yeah, The Incredibles jungle just looks, and it just looks kind of like the same two plants over and over again. It doesn't look particularly diverse or interesting. And when you look at them when they're in the top of the rock, you know, at the start of the movie, and they're like, we hit the wrong side of the frickin' falls. It does look like it's just a straight rock walk around. So I don't know why they end up in the jungle, but still.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a reason why they can't go from point A to point B.
Yes, it's Kevin's fault.
Yes, stupid Kevin. Moving on here, Gar, to the story. Early concepts differed from the final film. The initial version featured a floating city on an alien planet populated with Muppet-like creatures.
Much worse.
With two brothers vying to inherit their father's kingdom. And when the brothers fell to Earth, they encountered a tall bird who helped them understand each other. But the story just didn't seem to work properly. Don't know why.
Oh, yeah. It's not like there's no... Oh, wait, did you say Muppet-like creatures?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know you were going to be in the movie.
Thanks, Gar.
Welcome.
And the filmmakers realised that the most intriguing element of the city was the isolation. So they paired it back to a floating house with a single occupant.
And no aliens.
Yeah.
There is a mythical bird, but there's no aliens.
But how do we go from that to what we got? The creative process is wild sometimes.
It's like, all right, we're going to have these two aliens, they're going to fall to Earth, and they're going to find a bird. It's like, all right, we're going to keep the bird and the Earth bit. Yeah. We're going to keep the two people bit, but one's going to be an old man and the other's going to be a Boy Scout. And the old man will have his wife died and he's trying to fulfill her dream of taking her to the falls, while the child is having daddy issues and is looking for a father figure.
To that point, though, I remember seeing the trailer for Up. It was like 10 seconds where they float past the screen as they go up. And reading a synopsis where basically an old man takes a child to South America. And once again, like last week where I thought WALL-E was just WALL-E wandering around, I thought Pixar had lost their minds. This, on paper, does not work at all.
And it is like, this is the period in which like we can make whatever we want, you know? They had the run of Disney after Disney bought them, and basically they took over Disney as opposed to Disney taking over them. So it's just like, we can let our creative juices run wild. We haven't yet reached the period where we have to make too many sequels, so we can just do whatever the hell we want. We can make our weird floating balloon movie. And all of the visuals with the floating balloons always just look so wonderful and striking, which is the reason probably they use it as the trailer. Even just set against the blue sky with clouds, it looks so nice.
Yeah, the notion of turning your house into an airship using thousands of balloons is so whimsical, but also strikingly beautiful to look at. The sequence where the house takes off, it's just so beautiful, or even just the juxtaposition of an ordinary house floating by balloons. It's just really lovely. I had it as my desktop background for a long time.
I also enjoy how they set up the story reason for why he floats away in a house with balloons. It's just like he lived a life as a man who sold balloons to kids.
Yeah.
Which is the reason he had all the helium and had all the balloons.
So, like, yeah, it actually makes sense. And that's, like, probably 10 seconds of the movie, but it just sets up the reason and makes it make sense.
And there's, like, the wonderful moment where, you know, every so often, while they're giving the balloons to the kids, his balloon stand starts to float away and he constantly has to weigh it down. And it's, like, it just lays the seeds for the little story, you know. It's that little Pixar difference, isn't it? It's like, that's why he's a balloon salesman. Of course this is what he'd do.
Yeah, and that's why he knows how to weigh down the house as well.
He knows exactly the number of balloons to take off. He knows exactly the number of balloons to cut out to start floating downward. There's a word for that. Descending. There you go. And yeah, it is that little Pixar difference that they just add in those little touches.
Up is also notable, Gar, because Russell is the first Asian lead character in a Pixar movie.
About time.
We don't see that much representation at that time, so...
Yeah, these Pixar movies are either very white or animals.
Yeah. So, you know, and...
Not really animals, more bugs.
And you don't want to pat them on the back because it's only right that we should see different characters represented on screen. But at the same time, Russell could have been any ethnicity, so it is somewhat of a positive step forward.
Yeah. It's just people should see themselves in movies. I don't know why people find that such a... Like, I did not like this film any less because there is an Asian lead character. Yeah. And there's people who just melt down at that. It's like...
Tokenism at its finest.
What is wrong with you? People get to see themselves in movies and it does not change your enjoyment of this movie whatsoever. Why are you such a psycho about these things? Stop it.
I will say as well, Carl should not have bludgeoned that builder, but the developer using it as a method of getting him out of his house is pretty scummy.
Yeah, because we don't even mention that, the whole like capitalism run amok aspect of this movie where he is the last remaining property holding out while they're trying to build... Did they even say what they're trying to build? A supermarket, was it?
I don't know.
Shopping center?
You see big skyscrapers around, so it's some kind of development anyway.
Yeah, some developers want the land around him, but he's the last holdout, and they're doing everything they can to try and get him to sell the house. And yeah, they do eventually use him bludgeoning the dude, which he deserved, to be fair. But to declare him a menace to society, to get him to go to Shady Acres, or Shady Oaks, a retirement home.
And again, that's like a pretty heady concept for kids.
This builder trying to force this dude out of his house, and rather than go, he floats away with balloons.
I do love that, how he totally dupes those two orderlies as well.
And they're like, oh, he probably needs the pee. He's like, nope, floating away.
Yeah, he's like, take my bag to the car, I just need to say goodbye to the old place. And he's like, goodbye, suckers. I love that sequence. Gar, we would be remiss without talking about the dogs in this movie, Gar. First of all, Doug is hilarious, but also the other dogs. The way they speak in weird, overly long and formal sentences is very funny.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of offhand jokes. It's like when Charles Muntz accepts Carol and Russell as their guests, it's like, I will temporarily not bite you.
You will be the fool because I will be the victor. And it's just all these weird sentences. Like
they're so weirdly formal and like deadpan. It's the deadpan delivery that makes it good.
Yeah.
Because it's a robot translating the dog. So there's no like emotional inflection on their voice.
Yeah.
It's just like, you are my master. I love you.
They add a lot of comedy.
It's the thing that's put in for the kids. It's always the thing. It's like, all right, so we have this movie about this dude dealing with grief and the kid is trying to find like a replacement for his dad after his dad got divorced and then started paying less attention to him. So that's pretty heavy. Let's put some cool, funny talking dogs in for the kids.
And we have that bit of the film where Alpha has a broken translator, so he talks with a high-pitched voice. All very good stuff, but it's a great source of comedy. And then you see them serving them in the ship as well, like opening bottles of champagne and cooking. It's very funny.
Spilling it all over the place and then fighting over the hot dog. They're dogs. That is the best bit. It's like, this dude has been living in South America for literal like decades looking for this bird, which, by the way, the bird apparently not that hard to find based on Carol and Russell's experience.
Yeah.
They found the bird within like 15 seconds of landing. So clearly Charles not doing a very good job. Or maybe the fact that Charles has been using dogs this entire time has been a bit of a flaw in his plan.
Yeah.
His army of dogs are clearly just not very good at finding this bird.
But he is decrepitly old, so he can't really go out and look for it himself anymore.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's funny. That's why it works, because it's actually funny.
Speaking of Charles Muntz, as a villain, Gar, he's up there in terms of Pixar villains anyway, because his story arc is interesting. He starts off as a hero as such. Mm-hmm. You know, he's intentions are noble, but then he's embarrassed and discredited, and he becomes bitter and twisted over time.
But even when we get to the period where he's like the full-on villain and he turns on Carol, it's not out of like some master plan. It's just like a deep-rooted sense of paranoia that people are still trying to fool him or deceive him or make him look an idiot. So he doesn't trust anybody anymore. He doesn't trust the world. He has turned his back on the world until he finds this goddamn bird, and then people give him the respect he deserves. And everyone's out to get him. Everyone's out to try and stop him from getting his bird.
And like, he doesn't callous stuff. He lights the house on fire. He basically tries to kill Russell.
And like during that dinner sequence, he suggests that these are not the first people he has killed.
Yeah, they've all come and he's struck them all down.
He has fed them to his army of dogs.
But Gar, it all leads to the very first Pixar villain plummet to their doom.
Was there Zurg did plummet in Toy Story 2?
Yeah, I don't really count that as a toy, but like...
And even that, the bit is that he's plummeting to his doom.
Exactly.
But this is the first actual character to plummet to his doom. And Zurg survives, as we see, because he's playing catch with Buzz afterwards.
Yeah, but once, like literally, he didn't even think. He was just like, I need to pursue this bird, and then he just plummets to his doom. And in fairness, he could survive, but he's also old, so he probably turned to dust on impact.
Yeah, my favourite part is when he ties Russell to a chair and is about to drop him out of the back of the blimp.
Yeah, that's what I said. He tried to kill him.
Like, flat out. You know, it's not like some kind of murder, though. It's just like, I'm going to tie you to this chair and drop you, like, 10,000 feet out of this blimp. How high can blimps go? I don't know.
Thousands of feet, anyway.
Either way, Russell's very much going to die upon impact.
It's kind of like one of those things where, like, oh, well, I just opened the door. I technically didn't kill him.
It wasn't the fall that killed him, it was the landing.
Saying that as well, the climax is very thrilling. Surprising considering it's two elderly men, a child, a dog, and a bird.
Because you get the moment where he lands on, I've forgotten, the Pleasure Falls. Pleasure?
Paradise
Falls, completely different thing. When he finally lands on Paradise Falls and Kevin has been kidnapped and Russell is very sad, and he gets to the moment where he gets to sit there in his chairs and he does not feel fulfilled because he realizes that there is more to life now than just his old dreams. He has new dreams, and he looks at the book and he sees that Ellie all along was like, go on a new adventure now that I'm gone.
Yeah, and the thing about Ellie is that he feels guilty because she never got to fulfill her dreams, and maybe she didn't have the life that she had envisioned, but she was happy with the life that she had with Carl.
Yeah, but like everything after that sequence where he, like, as you said, goes full-on action hero, dumps everything out of the house and turns it into a full-on, like, plane, basically.
Yeah, and like, you know, there's people dangling out of the airship, and, you know, there's fighting, and like there's a lot of peril there, and it really does result in a thrilling climax, and, you know, they win the day in the end.
Yeah, and it would be remiss of us not to point out the score.
Of course.
The absolutely exceptional score by Michael Giacchino, which is the thing people remember. I remember for years, all of RTE shows, RTE, Ireland's national broadcaster, like Room to Improve and all that, they'd always use Pixar scores.
Just rip them off.
So you not even rip-offs, it's just like they'd license it or whatever. So you just hear the do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do in Room to Improve while Dermot Gavin is running around or whatever.
It's genius in its simplicity because in the opening sequence that we go through Carl and Ellie's life, it's used to different effects. So, you know, we have horns and trumpets and, you know, jazzy instruments that are upbeat. And then we just get the tinkling of the piano as we go through to the more somber parts. But the thing is, like, it's the same piece of music, but
recontextualized over and over.
Making these tiny changes completely changes the mood. And it's not just in that sequence. Throughout the film, they use the exact same piece of music, but changing it with the instrumentation or changing just the tempo or the speed of it, and it turns it into an absolutely different song. And one of my favorite parts is when it crescendos right at the end, where Carl makes it one of his biggest hero moments, and it's like almost like an action score at that point. It's just fantastic.
And yeah, it's still the leitmotif. It's still that one piece of music that's, as you said, reused, recontextualized, and repurposed throughout the entire film to fit each different scenario. Just a stunning score. It's a single piece of music and wonderful work. Great stuff.
A single piece of music, and like if you think about it, probably only like, if you take the clip before it repeats, probably like 10 seconds maybe. But
it's about a minute of music, I'd say.
Yeah.
But then, as it says, it's repurposed and changed to fit every single point of this movie, which is good. Thumbs up. Great stuff. It works. Every single time, as you mentioned, the scene where he's going like full on action here when he's flying through the air and they have this big upbeat and like propulsive version of the theme song versus the version you heard like very early in the movie when Ellie died, when it's really scaled back, really slowed down to just the piano track. Just wonderful. Just the score in this film. It does so much of the heavy lifting. That and the Ed Asner performance are the two things that do the heavy lifting of the movie, and they do it with aplomb.
Up, we mentioned all these elements that bring Up to a level that, while not being the best Pixar film, make it a prime example of Pixar firing on all cylinders. So this was recognized by critics and audiences. Up is the first Pixar film and only the second animated film to be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards.
First 3D animated film to be too.
Yeah. Under new rules that expanded nominations in the category. I think that's reductive though, because I think Up forced itself into the conversation.
Yeah, and I think it started with WALL-E that they were like, you've got to start nominating these movies. Like, these are not just children's movies. You cannot dismiss these movies as this side category anymore. These are worthy of being in contention for Best Picture. Which again, as we mentioned, not unprecedented because it happened with Beauty and the Beast, but again, it didn't happen in the 20 years since Beauty and the Beast, or well, 18 or whatever it was. So it was not a thing that happened regularly. It would happen again the next year with Toy Story.
But it's just recognizing this as an art form rather than a children's diversion.
Yeah, it's putting it on the standing that it should be along with every other movie that's released. This is not a great animated movie. This is a great movie.
The thing is, the characters look ridiculous because they are exaggerations of human beings, but I have such a deep affinity for them that throughout the film, you want to see them succeed even when Carl's being a bit of a jerk. And the peril at the end, I actually was holding my breath for, I have seen this film before, but it does make you really want to see them succeed and don't want them to come to any harm.
And like the look of Carl tells you about Carl. You know, he is short, he's stuffy, he's pent in. It makes you feel like a grumpy, curmudgeonly, stuffed up character, so that when he performs like that, it all makes cohesive sense. Like, it's not just we made him look like this because we thought it was funny. It's that we made him look like this because it fits who he is.
And the thing is, he was elderly when Ellie died, but he's more hunched over after she died. He's more, withdrawn. So we see the experiences inform how the character carries himself. Overall, the film was nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Animated Feature, which it won. Again, like WALL-E last week, handily. Not even a contest.
Let me check what else was in contention that year, see what it beat.
It also won Best Original Score, the first Pixar film to do so. Come on.
So thoroughly deserved in every single regard imaginable.
As I said, it seems simple in theory, but in execution, it's absolutely masterful. This is also the first Pixar film to be released in 3D. I did see it in 3D. There was only a few set pieces, but it did really enhance the ending and the scene where Carl unleashes the balloons and takes off for Paradise Falls. Much easier to do these kind of things in animation though, having good 3D effects because it's made in 3D in the first place.
I imagine the balloons look good in 3D.
It did. The shot as the house is rising, we see the balloons from above, like they were coming towards my face, and it was amazing.
Up, by the way, beat Coraline, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Princess and the Frog, and The Secret of Kells. Good year.
A strong field.
Yeah, a competitive year.
But well deserved. It's still the winner by a mile.
Yeah, landslide. It's, as I said, it's not the best Pixar movie. I still think that's WALL-E. But it is, like, as I said, the perfect refined version of everything they do. Even like the final closing beat, where they cut back to the falls and you see, sitting on the top of the falls is the house.
Yeah.
And Ellie will live forever until the house rots, I suppose, under like weather damage. But she will live forever where she always dreamed of living.
Or even when Carl dumps all his stuff to go and save Russell, the armchairs are side by side on the falls.
Yeah. So I wonder, did the house, when it fell, crush the armchairs?
Who knows? But like, he fulfilled his promise to her, but also fulfilled the promise to himself. And
fulfilled the final promise to her, which is go on another adventure. Yeah. Your life's not over without me. Yeah. There's a whole new chapter coming.
And we see that afterwards with Russell, and we'll see that in the TV show as well. Apparently it's short subject, so there'll be like probably 6, 7, 10, maybe 15-minute episodes. But I'm looking forward to that very much.
Yeah, especially the final performance of Ed Asner. Well, maybe not the final one, but certainly the final as Carl in Up.
Ed Asner, he had a long and storied career, going all the way back to the early days of Hollywood. Not the
early days of Hollywood. He was active in the 60s and 70s.
But like, that kind of older era of Hollywood, I suppose. He's not a Charlie Chaplin. Maybe that was an exaggeration.
He wasn't going back to the silent film days.
But he would have been known by a lot of people for his older exploits, but, this introduced...
particularly the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and then the spin-off afterward, which he was the first person to be nominated for both a comedic and dramatic Emmy, or not nominated, to win both a comedic and dramatic Emmy for playing the same character. Which shows tremendous range.
Exactly, and he brought that to Carl. He imbued him with life, and it brought him to a new generation, and while he'll probably be remembered for a lot of things, it's just nice that his last performance was one of the ones that more people than most can relate to.
Yeah, Ken's like, I don't remember the 60s. I was minus 20. How can I possibly remember the Mary Tyler Moore Show?
What I mean is Up is just more accessible to more people.
It's a whole new generation. That's always the case. It's always nice to see when a role like that brings an actor to a whole new generation that, would not be familiar with their older work.
R.I.P. Ed Asner.
Yeah, it's, again, just a stunningly weird coincidence that the day we are set to record this, literally hours before we sit down to record this, he passes away. It's just very strange, but It's such a good performance. As I said, he's the heart of this movie. This movie does not work without a performance that good. Because unlike WALL-E, which has basically no dialogue, that film works irrespective of the performances, this film works because of that performance.
The dialogue is mostly coming from him. We know we have Muntz and we have Russell, but he's basically driving, I would say, 60-70% of the movie.
He's the heart of it. He's the character for which the movie's entire emotional arc revolves around. And that all hangs on his performance. And his performance is great.
It's kind of cute that adults or older people would know him for Mary Tyler Moore, but there's a generation of kids that they may never have seen his face, but they'll know Carl forever, which is kind of nice. It's nice to be known for something like that. It's a great legacy to have.
Immortalized in the wonders of Disney Pixar animation. Don't we all want that?
All right, Pixar adventurers, it's nearly time for us to put away our cap and goggles for another week. As we discussed, there's some wonderful music in Up, but sadly there are no songs, so we won't be hearing from resident Magic by Design singer Nicole for this week, but she will be back next week with another Pixar tune, I promise.
Toy Story 3. I don't remember the song in Toy Story 3.
We Belong Together.
Ah, yes. She's not just going to do You've Got a Friend in Me again?
No.
There is a version at the start of the movie. She could.
She could if she wanted to, so we'll see what happens next week. New episodes of Magic by Design land every Monday, where all magical podcasts are downloaded. Stop by our website at magicbydesign.buzzsprout.com to find a full list of podcast platforms. We are literally everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, you name it, we're on it. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Keep up to date with all the latest from Magic by Design by following us on the social medias. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/magicbydesignpod, on Twitter at magicdesignpod, and on Insta at magicbydesignpod. We always love to see new listeners come to the show, so if you've got a spare moment, please do leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you give us 5 stars, we will send you a dead squirrel, because that is the best way for a squirrel to be.
Yeah, point. I'm pointing at the 5 stars, because you should give it to us.
Next week, we'll be reviewing Pixar's 11th animated feature, Toy Story 3.
You sure about that number?
Sure, I've double-checked. So be sure to join us for that. But until then, stay safe and remember, adventure is out there. Thanks for listening and see you next week.